Well, thank you again. I'm Dr. Hector Flores. I'm a member of the board of directors of the LA County Medical Association, and really happy that LACMA decided to sponsor this fire recovery and resource fair. And we thank all of you for coming. What I'd like to do is to ask each of you, our guests here today are from Santa Rosa, professionals who personally experienced loss of home, business, or both. And we're going to hear their story about recovery. And so we'll start with Dr. Jill Zekowy, and then have you share a little bit about your background. Then we'll go to Dr. Stefan Zekowy, and we'll go through everybody.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I'm a family physician who then went back and got a master's in counseling psychology. And so I transitioned my practice 15 years ago to just mental health, specifically perinatal mental health. So for as far as my experience with the fire, my practice wasn't affected so much, other than that for 3 weeks the town was in chaos, and so only people who were in crisis was I needing to work with. And actually I had somebody cover my practice after I found out that our house was gone. So I mostly got to focus initially on the fire experience and supporting my family through that. Our experience was that it was a very windy night. We hadn't slept in a long time, and so we put in earplugs, turned off our cell phones at 10:30 at night, and went to bed. And then we awoke at 3:30 in the morning to police officers in our bedroom saying, "Get out, get your kids and get out. There's a fire." And I could see out the window the orange glow and haze, and smell the smoke, and suddenly realized, this was true. And we got the kids, got my father, who was visiting from out of town with Alzheimer's, and his girlfriend, and 6 of us, and the dog got in a 5-seater and got the heck out. We didn't grab anything. I was in my PJs and a robe. My son, we didn't have time to grab his glasses in the dark. So we were spared the decision making that can be very painful. And in some ways it's easier to not have a choice. I felt like we had support right from the very beginning. We had police officers right there. And so it made me feel quite safe. And I'm very thankful that they came and got us. And that first night, probably the most stressful part was just being stuck in stop-and-go traffic on a wooded road with no exit. That was scariest, but then we have come a long way since then. And we had bounced around with housing, but were able to buy a home, a small, tiny home that was really wonderful and simplified. And we, over the next 4 years, 3.5 years, we rebuilt our home and moved back in a few years ago. So that's kind of condensed version of what happened. And I could talk a lot about it.
Thank you for sharing. And we'll come back to the theme of preparation and, sort of that blessing in disguise where you had to make the emergency exit, but what you might do. So we'll come back to that. Dr. Stefan Zekowy is an ENT physician and your other half. So Dr. Zekowy, could you share a little bit about how you experienced that first night?
Sure. The first night, I had been on call probably 12 of the previous 20 nights, and I just wanted to turn my phone off because I wasn't on call that night. And, I don't even think we had heard much. So we went to sleep, and we were fortunate that, police officers did wake us up, and it was actually 3:30 in the morning. And I think we were one of the last people in town to evacuate. And when they said you had a minute to leave, we ran downstairs, got our kids. I whacked my head against the wall, ended up with a little bit of a shiner, and, picked the dog up out of the crate, and we just gathered everything into the car, and we were in stop and go traffic for a bit. And then we ended up at my office, which seemed like a safe place. I had some clothes to change into, but everybody else was in their robes and pajamas. And then we just kept driving south on 101 until it was time to not drive anymore. We didn't really have any idea where we were going. We stopped at a hotel or a motel, and luckily there were rooms. We were then very fortunate enough to find someone to host us in a renovated garage for a week, and then stayed with one of my partners at work, his house with his family for 3 weeks. And we were also fortunate enough to buy a house, and it was nice to have a house that was closer to my work, closer to my children's schools. It made life easier while we could regroup. That I know that's not an option that everybody has, but we felt like we were focusing on just simplifying our lives. We lost literally everything. I didn't even take my iPhone. We didn't know for a few days whether our house had even burned or not. And then we were, through lots of hard work and luck and Joel's, planning and working with the builders and contractors, we were able to rebuild and move back in 3.5 years later. But, our daughter was out of high school and then into college, and our son was almost through high school at that point. It took a little longer than we had thought. But we feel fortunate to have come through it as we did, and with our children, everybody being safe.
Thanks for sharing that. And how about your practice was affected?
Fortunately, my practice was not really affected that much. I mean, that first week, pretty much nobody showed up. We kind of canceled clinic, but I remember driving into the office from, that renovated garage, that was more west in the county. I was driving east, and as I was driving east on Route 12, you could see the hills just burning in the distance, like it was just part of the landscape. And that was kind of a daily thing for a while. So, I mean, the fire actually went on, for a few weeks until it died down. And, speaking of driving, just there were more accidents. Everybody was lost. Traffic was insane. School was off for 3 weeks. And that first day back to school for the city's schools, there were just traffic jams everywhere. It was bizarre. And that whole school year was a little bit abnormal, but things did start to normalize out, and then we got to the real work of rebuilding. But I feel very fortunate that my practice was intact and all the hospitals in town were intact. That would have been quite the disaster if even one of those hospitals had.
That's so true. Thank you. Dr. Sudha Schlesinger, you're a highly respected member of the community and a very successful realtor, also went through a similar experience. Can you share your perspective and experience?
We had just gotten home from a wedding in Napa. We had driven the route the fire came through, experienced absolutely nothing, got ready to go to bed when I got a phone call. This was about 11:45, and it was a client of mine who lives a hill over from me telling me, Sudha, I think you should leave. It doesn't look good in your direction. And I said, what are you talking about? We had no idea. There was no smell of smoke. We had not seen anything. And I was questioning him, saying, why am I leaving and where? And my husband, who was just getting into bed, said, who are you talking to at midnight? I said, it's a client of mine, John, is calling. He's thinking, okay. And John kept insisting, you need to get out of there. I really think you should leave, because if a tree falls across your road, you're not going to be able to get out. I live up in the hills where there's only two ways out. And if a tree falls across the road, it is damn near impossible to get past it. So I didn't really pay much attention. Got into bed, and then we heard this loud crack, like a tree falling. So I got back up and I thought, okay, I better go check, because he had put the idea in my head. So I go outside and my husband follows me, and we realize every one of our neighbors is leaving. It's 12:15, 12:20 at night, and I've never seen my neighborhood bumper-to-bumper traffic at that time of night leaving. So we didn't really have any message other than my client telling me that I should leave. And so as I'm walking back in, I tell my husband, I think we should leave. I don't know what's going on, but we should leave. And my client calls again saying, Sudha, I think you should leave. Here's my mother-in-law's address. She lives in the next town over. She lives in Canada. She's in Canada right now. There's a key under the doormat. I will let her know that I've sent you there. Just go. And so we went to this random stranger's mother-in-law's house. I mean, it was the weirdest experience, but we had no choice. We had no real idea what was going on, except that everybody was leaving because the cell phones had failed. The power was out, and we got into our cars, grabbed the dog. We had 2 cats that we kept calling for, and they wouldn't come. So we just got in the cars and we left. We did have time to take at least our phones. My son was in the middle of college applications, his computer, his applications, all his book bag, and that's about it. And jumped into our cars and went to this mother-in-law's house and stayed there the night. And by next morning, it was pretty obvious that the house had probably not survived. And a week later, being a realtor, I sort of it was more instinct than anything. I just made a decision. I told my husband, I'm going shopping. And he said, what are you, crazy? I said, I'm going shopping. And I just walked out the door and I went and bought a house. I didn't really ask the insurance company. I didn't do any of that. I just went and bought a small house, exactly like this, 3-bedroom, 1-bath. It was right next door, walking distance from my son's school, because my whole goal at that point was to make sure he didn't get derailed. He was my second one. The first one was already in college. We went and bought a house, and I called in some favors with contractors I know, and they started working on it immediately and got it ready. But the 3.5 months that it took to get it ready, we lived in one room in somebody's guest house because we had to move out. The mother-in-law did come back home eventually. So we moved back out of her house, and one of my clients gave me a 1-room garage place where a 90-pound Ridgeback, my son, who was 17 and, strapping big boy, and 2 of us with 1 twin bed and a cat. We lived there for 3.5 months till we got into our little house. But the thing that kept me going was my job. A week after the fire and after I had bought my house, I got a phone call from one of my clients. 70% of my clients had lost their houses. That was very hard because I had not expected to lose both my job and my house at the same time. But suddenly the phone starts to ring, and continuously people were calling saying, I know you lost your house, Sudha. If you don't want to work, I'd understand. But if you're still willing to work, I still want you as my realtor. And so I just buckled down and said, you know what? This is a gift that they're giving me, that they still trust me to function after what I've gone through. And that was the best gift my community could have given me, because I just, I'm used to doing hard things. I have a PhD. I've come from India to study on my own and done quite well. And I just looked at it as, you know what? I've done hard things before, and I will get through this. And I haven't looked back. It has been harder than anything else I've done. Our construction process was probably one of the worst. We've had every kind of bad luck you can think of. And it took us 4.5 years to get through the process. And so even if you make good decisions, there's no guarantees that it will go well. For example, in my case, I made a good decision in who I hired, except he died during COVID. That put me back a lot because I had to go out and look for another person, and that person was not as good a choice. And so the whole thing took way longer than it should have.
Wow. Talk about a roller coaster ride, right? Incredible amidst all the other stress that goes with that. I'd like to come back to that in a bit. I want to introduce also Dr. Patrick Kowski, who's now retired ophthalmologist. I don't know if you were practicing at the
I
time.
was practicing at the time.
Okay, so if you could share your story as well.
Sure, mine is similar but different from the other stories. It was as Jill said, it was a dark and windy night, which sounds like the opening to a bad novel. It turns out it was a bad novel. It was about a quarter till 12 for us. We were in the area. Well, we live about 10 miles from the town of Calistoga, which is where Tubbs Lane is, which is where the fire started. And we had a landline that we never used, but suddenly our landline went off, and we heard an alarm. And I picked up the landline, and it said, fire in Calistoga. And I looked at my wife, Karen, and I said, well, I guess that's why we smell the smoke out there, because we could smell the smoke out there. There's a fire in Calistoga. It seems like they always get fires up there. We're probably going to be okay. And but I'll stay up just in case and see what's happening. So I stayed up for a while and went out about 15 minutes later. And I said, Karen, come look out here. And it was snowing. And I thought, how can it be snowing? And because it was kind of a chilly night that night, it was blowing. Well, it turns out it was ash from this wildfire that was heading toward us that I had no clue about. And I still was clueless. And I was still kind of in denial about this. And I'm a big one for denial, as it turns out. About 5 minutes later, I heard this honking and screaming. And I went back outside again. And one of my partners in my practice, who lives closer to Calistoga, came roaring up our driveway, screaming that we had to get out. We had to get out. The fire is right behind me. You have to get out. You have to get out now. And I was taken aback, much like Suda was. I thought, what? Fire? What?
Yeah.
And it turns out we had some people in our guest house that were renters who had been through the fires in Clear Lake County about 3 years earlier, and they were already getting ready to leave. And they also told us, you guys have to get out. We know what's coming. Get out while you can. And so we took that seriously. We had about maybe 10 minutes, and we collected everything we could. 2 dogs. We tried to find our cat. Couldn't find our cat. Cats can never be found when you want to when you want to find them. And my pet corn snake, I couldn't take the big cage out. So again, we left and I thought we'd be back in next morning, and it'd be a nuisance to have to clean up the ash that was around for the Calistoga fire. I had no clue when we would get home that the fire was going to have taken the house out. So we drove down to our building, our office building, which was in the path of the fire, but luckily never was taken out by the fire. I kind of reconnoitered there. I looked at an app on my phone while we were there that was indicating whether power to our house was still present. And about 10 minutes or so after we left, it went dark, presumably indicating that that's when the fire got to our house and took the house out. So that night we were able to stay with some friends at some friend's house. The next morning we were evacuated from that house and stayed at some other friend's house. And so over the next 8 weeks we stayed at friends' houses, moving about on average every 3 to 7 days, all while looking for a rental to move into. We eventually found a rental house. It was a married couple that was somewhat ironically moving to LA to take care of their elderly mother, and they decided they would like to rent the house to us. And so we were able to get that rental house. We stayed in that rental house for about 3 years, and it took us about 3.5 years to rebuild our home. And we were able to move in pretty much when the Zuckwis did in February of 2021.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. And your practice, was it affected?
It was. Our building, as I mentioned, was in the way of the fire. They were able to stop the fire, and the fire kind of diverted north of our building and took out a neighborhood north of us, which is a very sad affair. But our building survived, although there was smoke damage and there was toxic residue over the insides of the walls of the building. So initially, the National Guard was protecting these structures from having anybody get into them, so we couldn't get into our building. But after about 7 days or so, we were able to get in. We got lots of air purifiers in there, and used some insurance funds to be able to clean the walls and to scrub the building down. And we were able to get back into our practice in about 10 days. Prior to that, we were able to farm our patients out to practices in the surrounding areas, which I was always thankful for, that they would go to bat for us like that. So they helped us get through that first 10 days.
Wow. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Dr. Kasky, you also shared with us a couple documents that we actually distributed to the participants today. One was kind of some tips on how to start the recovery period, and also actually a checklist of reconstruction. Could you share a little bit about that? And I'll ask each of our panel to share their experience in terms of approaching reconstruction.
Yes, and when I got the invitation to come down, thank you very much, by the way. I really appreciated coming down to give some help. I thought, well, it'd be useful for me to kind of remember what I went through when we did this 8 years ago. And so I made a list of the things that I kind of remembered. And it really kind of boils down to the main message is that you will get through this. We were able to do it. We muddled our way through it, I would say. I don't think any of us feels like we were on top of our game when we went through this process, but we did get through it. And looking back on it now, there are a lot of things that would have been useful for us to know about how to get help and assistance. And so the document that I drew up was something that I thought might be helpful for people who are in the process of going through this right now. And it deals with how to talk with insurance companies, how to deal with insurance companies, and how to deal with contractors and that sort of thing. So basically, it's just some practical tips for people to utilize as they work their way through this muddled time.
I think, hearing comments from participants, they found it really useful to somebody's actually thought about creating a checklist and also giving them some resources to go to, which is exactly what was represented here today. Dr. Schlesinger, from your experience, how did you start approaching rebuilding? Providence obviously helped you in your work, but...
Again, like him, I wish we had a group like us. I mean, on the one hand, I don't wish this on anybody. Our insurance company essentially forced us to rebuild. They would not give us our payout without us rebuilding. If you don't have that clause in your insurance policy, you are much better off because you have more choices. I did not have a choice. The problem with rebuilding without a choice is that the process is such that once you start spending money for an architect, for a builder, for the foundation, and you stop halfway through because you can't handle it or you're running out of money, you've lost more money. And we didn't have a choice in not starting the process. So my best advice to people here as a realtor and as a person who has gone through this is really sit down with your insurance adjuster and see if you can get all the money on the table within a finite period of time before you break ground, and then make an educated decision on whether you want to go through this. Because the time it robs you of, it is like having a full-time job. I essentially had 2 full-time jobs for 4.5 years. And if you're not prepared to do that, or you don't have a spouse who can do that, it is really, really hard. And it is important to know as a couple, which one of you is going to take the lead on that. Because there are 300,000 decisions to be made. Nothing goes according to plan. And worst of all, nothing goes according to any kind of time. Time was the most, frustrating part of the whole process, was how long everything took. We are not used to being in professions where things just get delayed and delayed and delayed. We are used to delivering care. We are used to delivering results. We are used to having finite periods of time in which you work hard and there's an end result. This is not that. It is anybody's guess. There will be a dozen people in this group that came today that might get built in 2 years, but there'll be an equal number that may take 5 years. And you don't know which group you fall into. Like, I had the misfortune of having my contractor die halfway through the process. There is nothing one can do about that.
Yeah, that's tragic. Yeah. And how would you recommend starting, thinking, the checklist Dr. Kasky provided is really wonderful because it helps someone who's stressing out about how did you go about organizing your approach to rebuilding?
I didn't. I just bumbled through it. I have to be very honest, I didn't. The insurance company mandated that we rebuild, so we started, and the process just kept getting worse and worse and more expensive. And my husband and I were the good thing that came out of it is we realized we were strong as a couple. We were on the same page on most decisions, and we had very high earning potential that we kept going, so we could make up the loss of what we were not reimbursed. But if you don't have that luxury, you should seriously stop and think before you get started whether you want to get on this roller coaster, because there's no getting off halfway through.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
You will lose more money. You can get off halfway through, but now you're selling a piece of land with a half-done house that needs to be torn down. That costs more money than the land itself.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the problem is not rebuilding. The problem is you're competing with 6,500 other people trying to do it at the same time. That is the problem. Yeah. And there's no way around it.
Absolutely. Hey, let me go to the Zekawis in terms of how you manage that process.
Oh, I want to state a point of how I wish I had managed it. One thing that I heard from somebody else was they offered their contractor a $50,000 bonus if it was done by X date. And that was genius. That's how they got it done. And ours talked about 15 months, and I was like, we'll see about 3 years. But he kept talking about 15, maybe 18 months. And it was 3.5 years, and we moved in before it was permit ready. I just said, I am moving in. I don't care if there's no sink and toilet in the same bathroom. And I put socks instead of doorknobs in every door so we could close the doors, and we moved in. Things that helped us with construction, visiting every single day. It, as Sudha said, it is a full-time job. You have to be there. Every time I would miss it for a day or two, something would be done wrong, and I would have to go back. I think it definitely helps if you're building and you don't care, if you aren't moving back. I wouldn't do that unless you had to because of insurance. But you really have to be there and on it. Otherwise, even when they're following their own plans, they don't know it the way you know it. Things that are really essential, and this will sound basic, but you really must read your homeowner's insurance policy. It is not up to their best interest for you to know all the pockets of money in your plan. You must know it. If you can, befriend your homeowner's insurance loss specialist adjuster. We were blessed with a wonderful person. And every time I stayed on the phone with him and just kept talking, well, tell me how other people have handled this situation, or, are there any other pockets that we haven't used in our policy? And every conversation earned me $20 to $100K more in reimbursement. And so I would just talk to him. I got to know about his kids, like, we were buddies, and I have very warm feelings about Byron to this day. So not everybody lucks out that way, but if you can, you want them to care about you. So invite them in and have them want you to be something that makes them feel good about their job.
That's great. And Dr. Schlesinger mentioned, kind of splitting roles. Did the two of you kind of find yourselves identifying roles through this process for yourselves?
Yes. I mean, Joel did 95+% of it for sure. And I would say it definitely helps if one of the two of you is good at it and likes it. Joel is excellent at it, excellent designer, attention to detail, all of that. So that was very, very helpful. I mean, I took care of a little bit, in terms of like the low voltage stuff, the internet, the, sound system, telephone, designing all the wiring for that with some of the subcontractors. And also just kind of dealing with the insurance company in terms of the finances. I guess the things that I would say is, just making some analogies to medicine and surgery. I mean, your house is like an ICU patient. I mean, you have to round once or twice a day because, I mean, things could get missed. And even if it's not your fault and it's their mistake, and even if they say, we'll pay for it, it's time. So every mistake, oh, I'm sorry, it's going to delay things by 6 months or 2 months or 1 month. I mean, that stuff adds up. And at some point you just say, I'll deal with it, or I'm not going to let this happen, especially when they're pouring concrete. I mean, before they pour the concrete, you should make sure all those little markers are exactly where you think that they are. In terms of tidbits, one thing I would really recommend is, and we didn't do this because I didn't think we needed to, is to get a construction consultant beforehand. And I thought, oh, I'm a surgeon. What if somebody came into my office and said, this is my surgery consultant to make sure that you do a good job? I feel like this is not happening. But we hired a construction consultant almost after the fact because, I said, these charges are kind of weird. And she looked at everything and she said, you're being overcharged here, you're being undercharged here. All in all, you're getting a good deal. But if we had that person in the beginning, they could have really helped. And even when we kind of did like an extra little bit in terms of turning one area of the house into an accessory dwelling unit, and we went through 4 contractors, not of our own choice. The first one we signed with, they either like their principals all left, and then another contractor bought them, and then they jacked the price up 40%. And so then we got out of that contract. And the third contractor was good, but disorganized. And then they hired a foreman to help. And then he got his own contracting company. We went with him at the end. It was, we just wanted to get it done. And even that fourth contractor, who was really good, knew all the subs, very efficient, extremely organized, Johnny on the spot, great communication. When we were contracting for that ADU, he's like, okay, well, it's going to be another $6,000 to paint it. I'm like, what do you mean? Didn't we pay you all this money to, like, oh no, in the contract, it's, there's no painting included. And so it's not just what's in the contract, it's what's not on the contract. I mean, it's fine. He did a good job. We didn't care at that point, just finish the job. So I would definitely get someone who knows what they're doing, not just an attorney to look at the contract, but a construction consultant so that you see what is and what isn't in the contract. And, a house, in some ways it's more complicated than surgery, because with surgery, it's step A, step B, and you've done it and you can deal with things as it comes up. There are so many moving parts with a house, electricity, plumbing, low voltage, the trusses are made by a different company, the framers, the drywall people, and then the interior designing, 80 million choices to make. And if you don't have someone who's on top of it, and it's got to be you, then it's going to be a problem. I mean, it still says if you don't care how your house turns out, it'll get done. But if you actually care, then you have to be absolutely on top of everything at all times. Not to mention the fact that even if your contractor is good and you have good communication, the contractor tells the project manager, who tells the foreman, who tells whoever's working crew that day, and something may have gotten lost along the way. They may be using old plans, or maybe some miscommunication. So you really, when they're doing important stuff like, framing and windows and cement pouring, you have got to be on that. And then finally, the last thing I will say is, on my side, something I really wish I had done was keep a spreadsheet. I thought, oh, I'm going to have all the money come into this one Capital One account, and anything that goes out, I can just trace it back. Yeah. I thought we'd be done. I thought we'd be done in 18 months. I'm like, oh, it'll be fine. You stretch out 3.5 years, and the money comes in dribs and drabs. You can no longer access things online. It's all disorganized. So I would say every penny you spend, even including now, on your housing rental, the food that you used before you got into like a kitchen, every bit you spend on the contractor, the builder, any subs, put that in a spreadsheet. It doesn't have to be complicated. You can organize it and filter and sort it later. But if you don't keep a track of everything in one place, it will be a jumble. And I wish I had done that, because it was a jumble. At the end, when you're like, well, what did we spend on this? Because all the documentation your contractor has, that's a real jumble. And you're trying to go through it and look at your bank statements and the Capital One account and your credit card statement, and you don't know who's ordering what. One spreadsheet, list everything, sort it out later.
Yeah,
That's great.
100% I
You know,
agree.
you can use that to reconcile
Yes.
their data, because they, through dishonesty perhaps, or just honest mistakes, they'll make mistakes. You'll find discrepancies, and you can save a lot of money, by doing your due diligence in that regard.
It's a full-time job.
Yeah.
This
Yes,
is
job.
one of somebody in your family will. I heard one doctor say they went to some table where they said, oh, you can have a construction manager. No, the construction manager doesn't. I mean, yeah, they'll check that, the foundation isn't going to collapse. They're not going to check that you're being overcharged.
That's true. Yeah. One of the things that also came up in the tables, and Dr. Caskey, you thanked us for inviting you, but I want to thank all of you, all four of you, for making the time to come to visit with us, because I saw the power of the conversations you had with many of the participants today. How did you approach taking care of your own well-being? Maybe we'll start with Dr. Caskey, and we'll kind of...
Well, that came up several times today, as a matter of fact. I was surprised, although I shouldn't have been, at how emotional people got. There were quite a few teary eyes today that we all saw. And at 6 weeks out, that's to be expected.
Normal.
That's normal. I mean, we had a lot of teary eyes at 6 weeks out, and a lot of brain fog, fire fog, whatever you want to call it. Nobody could think straight. I still don't have memories of a lot of that time, a lot of the stuff
Yeah.
I can remember, but there are days and weeks that are probably gone in my memory. So, I mean, I can certainly understand what people were thinking today and how they were thinking. And a lot of people expressed to me that they didn't know where to go and what was going to happen. And what we could do with them today was to tell them, yeah, well, you are going to get through this. You don't know how you're going to do it, and I don't know how you're going to do it, but you're going to get through it, and life does get better on the other side. One of the first things that we did when we finally got into our rental house was I bought an exercise bicycle. And I thought, well, I really don't have access to the club because it was shut down that we used to go to. But I want to do something to burn off all this anxiety and excess energy and depression. And it's probably one of the best things we ever did. Like, we got on that thing, and I would get on that thing for hours and get my heart rate up and just forget myself and lose myself in that. And I have to say, it really made a big difference. My wife was using it too, and it made a big difference. It sounds simple, sounds silly, but getting some outlet for you to be able not to dwell on the sorrow that's permeating your life at that time I think it's worth its weight in gold.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Dr. Schlesinger, especially with your kids too, if you can share.
So for us, what helped me is my husband is an exerciser. He was always like that. He continued doing that. I was not. I was one of these people who used to say, oh, I have good genes, and in India we're mostly half-starved, so I don't need to exercise. I mean, that was literally my attitude. I was not into exercising. I hired a personal trainer to come to my house because I'm not motivated enough to go to a gym. And besides, our gym, half of it was burned, and they were working on it and it had closed. Hired somebody to come to the house to force me to exercise 3 days a week. I would also go for long walks with my clients because I had so many clients who had lost their houses. And we'd talk about their plans, our plans. And Dr. Caskey and my husband are partners, and they were a lifeline. We spent a lot of weekends together doing the things we always did, which was we raised our kids together. So we would have dinners on Sunday nights like we always did, but it was at their rental. And we kept up a few of our habits from our whole life as best as we could, because that was the familiar part. Everything else was completely new. Really, looking back, the hardest thing for anybody who goes through this is that it's a change, and it's a change you didn't choose. That's all it really is. The rest of it you can deal with time. That is the hardest part, is that this change was forced on you, and you didn't have time to brace for it, prepare for it mentally. Hard. Most doctors have done hard. They've done harder things than this. It's the fact that it comes at a time when you didn't have time to even think for 3 seconds as to how you were going to proceed. And if you can get into that mindset that it is just a change and you will have some solutions and you'll get to it in time, it really makes a big difference.
That's great advice. And to the Zakawis, how would you?
Well, I know this sounds very strange, but in the 2 months afterwards, I felt like the most blessed person alive. I mean, our family was safe. Our 2 kids were safe. And, you know, we had that kind of experience with policemen in our bedroom at 3:30 in the morning. And, you know, even thinking about it, it's like, what if they didn't come? What if they couldn't get in? You know, like, I don't really even like going back there. But afterwards,
Yeah. The relief.
everybody's safe. And all that piles of paper and all that mess in your garage, that's all gone. You know, I remember Jill had this refrigerator that just would not get fixed. It's like,
Oh, so many tricks.
So that's all
The
gone.
fridge is gone.
Yeah.
Such a relief.
So, I mean, it simplifies and distills what's important in your life
Absolutely.
Mhm.
True.
so quickly. You do have that fire brain fog, and I would be very careful driving on the roads
Yeah.
because everybody's weird. But, you know, in terms of me, you know, my practice was very busy. We were actually still recruiting. Believe it or not, we recruited a doctor, you know, from UCSF who joined, who basically the year after the fire, I mean, we interviewed her like right after the fire. It was crazy. They still came, and she's great. But, you know, I had for a long time at that point been exercising and weightlifting and taking both my kids weightlifting. And that really helped. And knowing that, you know, Jill was taking care of like all the house stuff, you know, buying that new house, looking for architects, doing all the designs, that was such a relief for me. And I will always be grateful, appreciative. So,
You had my back.
yes.
Gave me full freedom to
Full
choose
freedom.
any design choice I wanted,
Right.
except for the TV,
The TV height.
stereo.
Yeah.
Those were the
Those
only
were mine.
And you had no wicker.
No wicker.
No
I hate
wicker.
wicker. I don't like that.
So- Dividing and conquering
Right.
definitely helped. Yeah, it's a marathon, so taking care of yourself is hugely important. The exercise, connecting with people, getting outside. I think probably around here, walking on the beach would be really, really helpful and soothing. For me, also having rules. I will work on house stuff until 9 p.m. or 8 p.m. and then I give myself permission not to. I had a lot of support from friends, community organizations provided a lot of connection, and that was very, very grounding. And then I really, it sounds cliche, but I took on the sort of Buddhist sort of state in that I really focused on the present. What is known? What do I need to deal with right now? Don't get too far ahead in the future, and don't think about the past as far as what should be or was. Stay right today. What's on my plate right here and now? And I just kept bringing it back to that.
That's great advice too.
I really agree with that. And it's important for your children because they're watching you.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the good things that has come out of this fire is that you realize you made a good decision 30 years ago when you picked your spouse. You made an excellent decision in how you work together, all the decisions you made along the way. And then your children sort of are watching and learning. You're not necessarily even talking to them. Mine were already in college, less than halfway through the process. But when they have things that come up, you find that they'll call you and tell you after the fact how they dealt with it. And if you ask them, why didn't you tell me? They said, well, you guys had a lot on your plate. I just needed to get on with it. You realize that you are the best role model for them. And if you keep that in front and center, it's really, it's good. At the end of 5-6 years, you've got a family that's very strong and kids who are strong and resilient, and you've modeled great behavior for them.
I would echo that. The resiliency that you can exhibit helps them to become more resilient.
Yeah,
absolutely. That's definitely a side.
Stefan, you were going to?
I was going to say, our son recently told us that the weeks and months after the fire were some of the best of his life. Because, we're all together,
Yes.
we're all
Yes.
supporting each other.
Same thing.
Our daughter said the same thing.
It was surprising, but I'm glad that they feel that way.
Yeah. No,
They saw how we supported each other.
yeah.
I think that's the role modeling that you talked about. Well, we're getting to the end of time, but I want to thank you for participating in this. But I would like to give you a chance to see if you want to share some parting words of advice to physicians who are going to be listening to this interview, or to the agencies that you work with that you thought maybe could have done a better job, local, federal, or state. We'll start with Dr. Caskey.
Yeah, well, it's kind of two different scenarios. First of all, the main thing that I want to say is that, I would say that we all feel as though we kind of muddled through this. I was fortunate to have my wife who's got an accounting mind, and she was like Jill. She was able to do pretty much everything. And we had a friend that helped us out who came out of retirement, who is an interior designer, who did a very important task for us. When you're faced with different decisions, you may have 20 or 30 of them. And she knew us well enough that she could winnow those decisions down to 3 or 4. And if I presented with 3 or 4, yep, I can help pick that out. And so that was worth its weight in gold. One of the things that I would say was that in our fires, our response systems were totally caught with their pants down. Local, state, and federal. They had no clue what they were doing. Cell towers went down. The fire occurred at night. Planes couldn't fly. They didn't know how to prioritize where the fire was going. They had to make decisions to let some houses burn and try to save lives as much as they could, because they had no manpower to be able to do anything else. And so we really had to kind of just wait it out through that night and hope for the best the next morning. That said, I have to really, really commend Sonoma County, because they've really gone a long, long way toward improving the responses now. And one of the things that my wife and I decided to do when we got on the same page, finally decided that we wanted to rebuild a house. We didn't rebuild a house because we wanted to move into it. We rebuilt it because we thought we would probably sell it, and we thought we might put some more value into the lot by doing so. So we rebuilt it with in mind that we could, if we liked it, we liked staying there, we would live there. If we didn't, we would not get attached to it. We would sell it and go somewhere else. Well, over the years that it took us to rebuild, we saw what Sonoma County was doing and how much better they were responding to the fires. How quickly they respond to even the slightest bit of smoke we see. And it really gave us a sense that, yeah, I think they are doing a better job. We are much more fire safe. Our house is built in a much more fire safe manner. But the final thing I would say on the other leg of it is that, muddling through as we did, if we can get through it, you can too. Anybody can. And so hold that up.
That's a wonderful message. Yeah, thank you. Dr. Schlesinger?
In my case, I want to really give a thumbs up to Sonoma County. After the fires, they came in and they set up that sort of section for permits that was dedicated to fire rebuilds. That was one of the best financial decisions they ever made. The outside help that was brought in was efficient and pleasant to work with, and they got building permits through correctly and properly in rapid response. And since then, the roads are being systematically fixed. We had a problem with water contamination briefly because some of the pipes had melted, and that was addressed. The county did a spectacular job. I know, especially currently, everybody says every government agency is this and that and that. I have to say that it was the government agencies that never let us down. It was the private contractors that I have more of an issue. The government agencies did what they were supposed to do. They did it mostly in time, and they did it as best as they could, and they're continuing to do their job. So I'm very pleased with how Sonoma County responded, and Governor Newsom and our representatives, without exception, they came through for us.
That's great. Thank you.
So have some faith in the system. Our state is used to dealing with these things, and we're getting better at doing it. Every time we turn around, it will get rebuilt, and yes, you'll be annoyed, but really blaming the people in charge, this is so sudden and so large. They're human beings. They cannot anticipate. And yes, a wrong call was made and some people were evacuated. Would you rather have burnt in the fire or just been evacuated? Being evacuated or not having power is just an inconvenience. in the grand scheme of things, it is not such a big deal.
Yeah, that's true. It's very important to be careful about all those issues. And to the Zekawis, any last?
Just to reiterate, spreadsheets. But the other thing, I completely echo Sudha's comments. I mean, I feel much more confident now living in Sonoma County. I mean, every whiff of smoke. I mean, there's that Watch Duty app that I know now has got 60 million downloads that originated in Sonoma County from a private person who saw a need and has gotten great cooperation. I just feel like everybody's on the same page. And things are as good as they can be, and the governmental agencies were great. If you're in a homeowners association and you have some people who seem to be obstructionists, form a political coup and vote them out, and that's what we did in our county. We literally brought in the rubber stampers, like a permit approved, and all the people who were there who were obstructionists were all voted out en masse. That helped a lot. Yeah. And so, you can do it. If you see that there's a problem, you'll have the support to try to fix it. So that's what I would end up. Thank you.
And I'm thinking one of the biggest tasks is creating a sense of safety. And how do you feel safe from fires ongoing? And for me personally, when I now in dry seasons scan the app Windy and look, are there going to be strong winds? Is it coming in a direction that doesn't work for my neighborhood? And then and that helps me know how acute to be or whether I can just relax. And also Watch Duty is very helpful as well. And so I scan those things and I have a plan for how to do this better.
Those are very reassuring words for sure.
The Watch Duty, the windsurfing app, and the air quality app. Those are live in a little box of my iPhone. I check those.
It's true.
And it works.
Well, thank you so much. On behalf of the members of the LA County Medical Association, I want to thank you all, Dr. Jill Zekawi, Dr. Stefan Zekawi, Dr. Sudha Schlesinger, and Dr. Patrick Kasky. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was therapeutic for all of us to have you here. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. We appreciate it.